Every boarding school in West Africa has rules. Wake up early. Greet your seniors. Be inside before 9 o'clock at night. Those rules are written on notice boards. But there is one rule that nobody ever writes down. Nobody posts it. Nobody announces it. Nobody explains it to the new students when they arrive. And yet, every single girl who has ever slept in a boarding school dormitory in this part of the world knows it. Knows it in her bones. Knows it the way you know not to touch fire. The rule is this: never walk the corridors alone at night. This is Greenfield Girls College. Deep in the bush, far from town, far from family, far from safety. And somewhere in these corridors, something is working tonight. Something that has been working for 50 years. The girls call it Madam Koi Koi. This is her story. And if you are watching this alone tonight, I am sorry. Take a breath. Settle in. And listen carefully. Because what I am about to tell you is not just a story. It is a warning. It is a memory. It is the kind of thing that lives in old buildings, in dark corridors, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. In the boarding schools of West Africa, there is a name that every student knows. Young or old, brave or timid, it does not matter. Every child who has ever slept in a dormitory bunk, under a ceiling fan that creaks through the hot night, has heard this name whispered at least once. The name travels from one generation of students to the next, growing a little heavier with each telling, a little harder to shake off in the dark. The name is Madam Koi Koi. And before this story is finished, you will understand exactly why that name makes even grown people go quiet. The year was 1978. The school was called Greenfield Federal Government Girls College. It sat deep in the bush, far from the nearest town, surrounded by tall trees whose branches stretched over the red-roofed buildings like the arms of patient giants. The school was old, very old. The walls had been painted white once. But years of rain and sun had turned that white into a tired, cracking yellow. Thick green vines climbed the sides of the dormitory buildings. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and old wood. At night the generator hummed and the ceiling fans turned slowly overhead, pushing the warm air in lazy circles around and around without really cooling anything. It was a school like thousands of other schools across this continent. Ordinary in most ways. Most ways. On a Saturday morning in September, a battered old bus pulled up to the school gate. It squealed and groaned to a stop, coughing out a thick cloud of black smoke before going quiet. The gate swung open. One by one, students stepped down from the bus, new girls, first years, carrying their metal boxes and their rolled-up mattresses and their bags of food wrapped in old newspaper. Their mother stood nearby already dabbing their eyes with the corners of their wrappers. Their father stood straight and told them to be good and work hard. Hugs were exchanged. Promises were made. A few tears fell on the dusty ground. And then the bus drove away. And the girls were alone. Among those new students was a girl named Ada. She was 14 years old. Thin and tall for her age. She wore her hair very short and she had eyes that were always looking, always measuring, always taking note of everything around her. She did not carry much, a small brown metal box and one bag. Her mother had held her for a long time before letting go that morning. But Ada had not cried. She had made herself a quiet promise about that. She followed the stream of new students through the iron gate and into the compound. A senior student with a green prefect badge and the confident walk of someone who had memorized every rule of this place came toward them. Without smiling, without slowing down, the senior pointed toward a long white building at the end of a dry dusty path. That was dormitory block C. That was where the new girls would sleep. The senior said this once, clearly, and turned and walked away before any of the new girls could gather enough courage to ask a question. Ada picked up her box and walked. The path was dusty. Her sandals scuffed softly against the ground. Around her the other new students whispered to each other and giggled nervously, already forming the small alliances that would become friendships over the coming weeks. But Ada walked quietly, studying everything she passed, the old buildings with their cracked corners, the football field gone dry and brown, the rusted water tank that leaked a slow dark stain down its side, the way the senior students walked with their chins lifted like they owned every inch of the air above this compound. Inside Block C the dormitory room was long and narrow. Metal bunk beds ran along both sides, each with a thin mattress and a small locker beside it. The windows had no glass, only iron bars and a thin mesh that let in mosquitoes without letting in enough breeze to make a difference. The floor was grey concrete, swept clean but stained with years of use. Ada chose a lower bunk near the far window. She set her box down. She sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around slowly. Then from the bunk above her a girl with round full cheeks and two fat braids stumbled down and leaned over the edge, grinning like she had known Ada her whole life. "My name is Blessing," the girl said, as if announcing something very important to the whole room. "What is your own name?" "Ada," said Ada. Blessing tasted the name in her mouth like she was tasting something new. "Good name," she decided cheerfully. "Your mother must really like you. Come, let me show you where the bathroom is before the seniors find a reason to give us punishment for standing in the wrong place." And just like that, without ceremony, a friendship began. By the end of the first week Ada had learned the rules of Greenfield. There were many. You woke at 5 in the morning to sweep the compound before breakfast. You washed your own clothes every Saturday. You greeted every senior student in the passageway or risked being sent to cut grass in the afternoon heat. You were inside your dormitory by 9 o'clock at night. The rules were posted on notice boards. They were announced at morning assembly. They were enforced firmly and without mercy by the prefects and the house mistresses. But there was one rule that nobody posted anywhere. One rule that never appeared on any notice board or assembly announcement. One rule that nobody explained to the new students when they arrived. And yet every single girl in that school knew it. Knew it the way you know not to touch fire. Knew it deep in the bones. You must never, not ever, walk the corridors alone at night. On the 7th night at Greenfield, Ade found out why. It was past 9. Most of the girls in Block C were already in their beds. Some were reading by the thin yellow beam of a torchlight under their blankets. Some were already sleeping. The ceiling fan creaked slowly overhead. Outside, the night insects were singing so loudly their sound filled the room like something solid. Then a girl named Grace, short and serious, with the kind of face that does not say things it does not mean, sat up slowly in her bed and said in a low, careful voice, "Did any of you hear it last night?" Several girls turned to look at her. Blessing, above Ada, lowered her torchlight. "Hear what?" someone asked. "The sound," Grace said. She paused long enough to let the silence in the room grow heavier. "Koi. Koi. Koi." The room went still in a way that rooms do not usually go still. Even the girls who had been pretending to sleep stopped breathing. Outside, the crickets continued screaming, but inside Block C there was nothing but silence and the soft creak of the fan. "That is just the night watchman," said Sandra, who slept near the door, her voice trying to sound casual and failing. "His boots make noise when he walks the compound." Grace looked at her. "The night watchman wears rubber slippers," she said flatly. "I have seen his feet every single night since we arrived." What I heard was not rubber slippers. What I heard was heels. High heels. On the corridor floor. Coming from the direction of the old classroom block. Nobody said anything. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Blessing, who was the kind of person who could never leave a mystery alone, said quietly, "Tell us. Tell us the whole story. Everything." Grace pulled her blanket up to her chest. In the dim torchlight her eyes were dark and very serious. She began to speak slowly, the way you speak when you want every single word to land properly. Her name, she said, was Madam Patricia. She was a teacher here. Many, many years ago. Before we were born. Before our mothers were old enough for secondary school. She taught mathematics. And she was the most feared teacher this school has ever known. She paused. She wore high heels every single day. Red ones. The sound they made on the corridor floor. Koi, 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 was a sound that every girl in this school recognized immediately. It meant she was coming. And when the girls heard that sound, they froze. Because if she caught you doing anything she disapproved of, talking in class, passing a note, sleeping during a lesson, sitting with your legs apart, she would punish you in ways that would make you cry for the rest of the week. Grace's voice dropped lower. She slapped. She pinched. She made students kneel on hard gravel for hours under the hot sun. She pulled ears hard enough to leave marks. She humiliated girls in front of the whole school. She was not strict the way a good teacher is strict. She stopped. She was cruel. There is a difference. Several girls in the room had pulled their blankets tighter without realizing it. Blessing had gone completely quiet above Ada, which almost never happened. But nobody ever stopped her, Grace continued. Nobody was believed. The principal was her friend. The other teachers were afraid of her too. And so she continued. Year after year. Girl after girl. And nobody helped them. Ada, lying very still on her lower bunk, felt something cold move slowly across her skin even though the room had not changed temperature at all. What happened to her? She asked quietly. Grace looked directly at her. She died here, she said. In this school. In this compound. Nobody knows exactly how. Some people say she fell down the back staircase late one night. Some say her heart gave out. Some say the girls whose hearts were fullest of pain, the ones she had hurt the worst over all those years, some say they gathered together quietly and prayed that she would suffer. And that their prayers were answered. She paused. But her spirit never left. She is still here. Still walking these corridors at night. Still wearing those red heels. Still looking for students to punish. And then Grace looked around the room slowly at every single face before she said the next words. Still making that sound. Koi. 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 Not a single girl spoke for a very long time after that. Finally Sandra's voice came out thin as thread from near the door. How do you know when she is getting close? You hear it first, Grace said. Koi. 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 From somewhere far down the corridor. And it gets louder. Closer. Each sound sharper and heavier than the last. And if she finds you alone in the dark. She stopped. Then what? Blessing pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace shook her head slowly. The girls who have seen her face do not like to talk about what they saw. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The ceiling fan creaked. The insects outside continued their relentless song, completely indifferent to everything happening inside that room. 3 days passed after that night. Nothing happened. The school continued being the school, bells and lessons and meals and sweeping and the long heavy heat of the afternoon. Ada began to think the way practical people do, that the story was probably something the senior students invented to frighten the new girls. Boarding school was full of that kind of game. Stories passed down from one set of students to the next, growing bigger and wilder and scarier each year. Entertainment. Tradition. Not real. She decided it was nonsense. Then came Thursday night. Ada had forgotten her mathematics textbook in the classroom. She remembered it just as the lights-out bell rang across the compound. Madam Johnson had promised a quiz first thing Friday morning and Ada had not yet finished reading chapter 7. She needed that book. She reasoned it out calmly. The classroom was 60 meters away. She would run there, grab the book, and be back in 3 minutes. She had a torchlight. The path was straight. She was not afraid. She pulled on her slippers, took her small torchlight from under the mattress, and slipped through the dormitory door before Blessing could notice and start asking questions that would slow her down. The night outside hit her like a wall of warm dark air. The generator had already been switched off and the compound lights were dead. The only light came from a pale hazy moon that kept disappearing behind clouds, giving barely enough to see the outline of the path ahead. Low bushes lined both sides of the path. Somewhere far away a dog was barking at something it had decided it did not like. Ada walked fast. Her torch beam moved ahead of her. Her slippers slapped against the ground. She focused on the classroom block, getting closer with every step. She pushed open the unlocked door of her classroom. Her torch swept across the rows of desks. There it was. Her mathematics textbook sitting right where she had left it on the second desk from the window. She grabbed it, tucked it under her arm, turned to go. And stopped. Coy. She stood completely still. A pause. The night insects outside. Her own heart beat loud in her ears. Coy. Coy. It was coming from the corridor outside. From the far end near where the staircase led up to the sealed second floor. Slow. Measured. Each sound sharp and deliberate on the concrete. The sound of pointed heels striking the floor with absolute certainty. Coy. 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 Coming closer. Ada did not make a decision to press herself against the wall. Her body made that decision. She was suddenly flat against the inside of the classroom doorway, back against the cold wall, torchlight switched off, wrapped in complete darkness. She held the textbook tight against her chest and she did not breathe. Koi. 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 Getting louder. Closer. Each sound more deliberate than the last. Each one placed with a patience that felt ancient and purposeful and completely without mercy. Koi. Koi. Right outside the doorway. Right there. The sound stopped. Whatever it was had stopped moving. Right outside the classroom door. Right on the other side of the wall she was pressed against. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Ada had ever experienced in her entire life. It pressed against her eardrums. It pressed against her chest. It filled every corner of the darkness around her and left no room for anything else. 1 second. 2. 5. 10. 20. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. The air just sat there, heavy and waiting and very, very close. And then, slowly, the sound resumed. Koi. 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 Moving away from her now. Back the way it came. Down the corridor. Fading sound by sound into the darkness of the far end of the building. Getting quieter. Getting quieter. Until there was nothing left but the sound of the insects outside and Ada's own shaking breath. She stood against the wall for another 30 seconds without moving. Then she ran. She ran out of that classroom and down that path, and her slippers flew off her feet twice and she did not stop to pick them up. She hit the dormitory door with her shoulder, burst through it, threw herself onto her bunk so hard the whole metal frame rattled and shook. Blessing stirred in the bunk above her. Ada, she murmured, still half asleep. You okay? Ada did not answer. She pulled the blanket over her head and lay in the hot darkness listening. Listening to every single sound in the school around her. The fan. The insects. The breathing of the other girls. Waiting. But the sound did not come to the dormitory that night. She stayed awake until she could no longer hold her eyes open. And only then did she let herself sink into a thin, uncertain sleep. But somewhere in the dark compound outside, in the long empty corridors of the old classroom block, something was still walking. Something patient and deliberate and ancient. Something that had been walking these corridors for a very long time. Something that had found her tonight. And something that would be back. Koi. 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 And that is where we leave Ada tonight. Alone in her bed. Heart still racing. The school outside dark and still and silent. But not empty. Never empty. Part 2 of Madam Koi Koi is coming, and in part 2 Ada discovers who this woman really was. Her real name. Her real story. The truth that has been buried in this school for decades. And I promise you, the truth is far darker than anything Grace told that dormitory that night. To make sure you do not miss part 2, subscribe to this channel right now and tap that notification bell. That bell is the only guarantee that YouTube will tell you the exact moment part 2 is released. It is free and it takes 2 seconds. Now I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me, did you grow up hearing stories about Madam Koi Koi? Does your school have its own version of this legend? Or just tell me honestly, what was the scariest moment of part 1 for you? Was it when Grace said the name for the first time? Was it the sound in that dark corridor? Was it the moment the sound stopped, right outside the door? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, give it a thumbs up. And share it with one person tonight. Just one. Someone who thinks they are brave enough to watch it alone in the dark. Let us see how brave they really are. I will see you in part 2. She will see you sooner. Koi. Koi. Koi.